Welcome to Site 384, Study Session 9, Types of Research Continued. Correlational Research. Correlational approach to research is non-manipulative, focusing on naturally occurring events. Within the field of social psychology, this would mean studying the naturally occurring characteristics of people, such as their abilities, personality traits, demographic characteristics, or interactions with others. In other words, correlational studies are those studies that are designed to establish the extent to which two or more variables are related. Correlational studies imply causal relationships between two or more variables. For example, suppose a researcher believes that there is a relationship between class attendance and academic performance. That is, those who attend classes frequently perform better than those who do not. He then designed a study to measure the frequency of class attendance and academic performance. The outcome of the study will indicate the degree of relationship between the independent variable, that is frequency of class attendance, and dependent variable, that is academic performance. The typical approach then, when using the correlational method, is to measure two or more characteristics of each member of a group of people, and then to determine the relationship between the scores on one variable and the scores on the other variables. Correlational research focused on naturally occurring characteristics is valuable when 1. A variable cannot be experimentally manipulated, for example, age, gender, personality. 2. Ethical considerations prevent manipulation of a variable, for example, love between two people, physical danger. 3. Manipulation of variables might be so obtrusive as to change the nature of the phenomenon being studied, for example, attempt to change the leadership styles of people experimentally. In spite of its advantages with regards to studying naturally occurring phenomenon, the major limitation of the correlational method lies in the fact that we cannot say variable A caused the observed changes in variable B. At best, what we can say is that a change in variable A is associated with a change in variable B and the direction and strength of the observed changes. For example, suppose we find a correlation between liking and the degree of interaction between two individuals. We cannot conclude that liking leads to more interaction because there are other plausible explanations of the correlation. It could be that interaction can bring about liking. Liking and interaction may be the cause of each other in a circular or reciprocal manner. Personal similarity in terms of interest may bring about more interactions, etc. A second limitation of correlation is that the researcher cannot exercise control over the variables and just assumes that the variables of interest go together. The result of correlation is usually stated in terms of zero correlation, positive correlation, or negative correlation. Zero correlation occurs when changes in one factor does not result to any change in the other factor. When one unit change in one factor is accompanied by one change in another factor, there is perfect correlation. It is perfect positive correlation if one unit increases in factor A brings about one unit increase in factor B. In this wise, both factors tend to go up together or go down together. Or perfect negative correlation, which occurs when one unit increase in factor A brings about one unit decrease in factor B. Observational method. This is another method of study utilized by researchers when they want to observe how events occur in their natural environment. Observational research is premised on the assumption that using scientific procedures and instruments certain phenomena can be best studied in their natural environment. Another name for observational research is naturalistic observation, because the researcher makes observations in a particular natural setting over an extended period of time, using a variety of techniques to collect information. The final report usually includes the observations made and the researcher's interpretations of the findings. Observational method is suited for situations where the researcher is interested in describing and understanding how people in a social or cultural setting live, work, and experience their environment. Also, it is important that the event to be observed is clearly defined and the method of observation explicit enough to allow for replication by others. A researcher who wants to observe behavior in a social setting, such as a drinking bar, must first define, that is, operationalize, what type of behavior she wants to observe, maybe between the sexes, and deciding content, tone, etc. of interaction. Types of naturalistic observation. 1. Participant observation, also non-concealed observation. Here, the researcher assumes an active inside role. Since participant observation allows the researcher to observe the setting from the inside, the researcher has the opportunity of experiencing events the same way as the participants themselves. A potential problem with this method is the possibility of the researcher losing the objectivity necessary to conduct scientific observation as a consequence of group membership. Where the presence of the researcher becomes obvious, it might influence the behavior of the participants. Thirdly, mixing with certain groups could be potentially risky for the researcher. 2. Non-participant observation, also concealed observation. Unlike the participant observer, the non-participant observer is an outsider who does not become an active part of the setting he is observing. It is sometimes preferable when it is suspected that the presence of the observer may influence and alter the behavior of those being observed. This method is less reactive because the participants are not aware that their behaviors are being observed and recorded. For instance, it will be more useful to study student behavior from a distance than through participant observation. Experimental research. 3 types of experimental research are common in the behavioral sciences, viz. Field experiment, laboratory experiment, and field studies. Field experiment. Field experiments are experiments that are conducted in settings that are natural for the participant. In many field experiments, the participants are not usually aware that they are subject in an experiment, while in some they may be aware. For example, Balogun, 1991, conducted a field study to examine the effect of bargaining outcomes by manipulating bargaining strategy and mode of dressing. This activity is normal and may not have evoked suspicion from participants. 4 cells were created, and the outcome of the research highlights the interactive effect of modes of dressing and bargaining strategies on bargaining outcomes in the open market. Thus, in field experiments, the researcher can control the independent variables through manipulation to observe its effect on the independent variables. One limitation of field experiments is that the researcher cannot say conclusively that the observed change in the dependent variable was as a result of the manipulation of the independent variables, since other variables were not controlled. Another limitation has to do with finding a suitable or appropriate setting for the experiment. Laboratory experiments. Laboratory experiments appear more convenient for the researcher, principally because they are conducted on home ground, where the necessary equipment and subjects are often readily available. They frequently allow more control over conditions, more isolation of variables, and greater precision of measurement than field experiments. Consider this example of a laboratory experiment. Suppose a researcher wants to investigate the effect of noise level, that is high, medium, and low, and sex, that is male and female, on recall ability of selected participants. The participants are randomly assigned to different experimental conditions and then asked to recall what was read out to them under different experimental conditions. Bear in mind that the research environment is usually in a laboratory where there is high control of external variables that can confound the result of the experiment. Within the laboratory environment, the researcher can manipulate noise to the desired decibels for the study and assign the participants to the different conditions. Among the disadvantages of the laboratory experiment is the issue of ethical and practical limitations, which prevents the use of strong manipulations of certain attributes such as fear, anger, and hatred in an experiment. This often reduces the strength of the effect obtained. Field studies. In field studies, the researcher's interest is primarily in observing variables and using the information obtained to predict their control over other variables of interest while making attempts at controlling the variables. In achieving this, the researcher may use longitudinal field study or cross-sectional field study. Let's say the researcher's interest is to examine the effect of long-term alcohol intake on memory. The researcher may use individuals of different ages, say between 18 years to 23 years, and study alcohol effect on their memory. Or he could study the effect of alcohol on a particular individual's memory over a 5-year period. We have come to the end of study session 9 and PSY 384. Thanks for listening. Measurement than field experience.